Today is the feast of the conversion of St. Paul on the pre-Vatican II calendar. And that's fitting for today's subject. See, the very super duper Catholic former President Joe Biden has sailed off into the sunset to enjoy his remaining years on beaches, eating ice cream, playing with his grandkids, and doing all the other things octogenarians should be doing, other than focusing on his Catholic faith, which should actually take precedence over all those other things that I just said, due to his age and the way he lived his life as a highest profile Catholic in the United States for the past couple of decades. The conversion of St. Paul is a story of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, having his encounter with our blessed Lord. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Our Lord asks him, while St. Paul is literally on his way to go persecute some Christians. You know the story. Virtually every, even vaguely serious Christian knows the story. That story ranks highly among the stories in the Bible because it's a perfect characterization and illustration of how literally anyone can be saved. They can have a, what we now call a come to Jesus moment, amend their lives, and have the zeal of an apostle. If St. Paul can be converted, anyone can. The story of Judas is also likewise important. If one of the apostles, one of the men who spent time physically with our Lord during his earthly mission, can turn to betray Christ to the point where they hand him over personally to the temple authorities, and anyone can fall. At one time, Americans held our presidents in high regard. Even if we didn't actually like them personally, we still respected them as because of the office they held, generally speaking. Those days seem to be long behind us, at least for the time being, but imagine this scenario. A president leaves office, and just before he leaves office, he makes a rather questionable decision, which is then announced a few days later, where he's functionally left the faith that the media has celebrated him practicing. It seems unthinkable, but that literally just happened. Joshua T. Charles was the first to report on this on X, as far as I can tell. So we're just going to use his post here on X. If you're not familiar with Mr. Charles, I would tell you right now, he's one of the best follows you can follow on X or Facebook or anywhere you can find him. He's an apologist, a Catholic. He's an apologist who usually spends his time wrangling with Protestants to try to get them to come home to Rome. And he gives very systematic but easy to understand arguments that refute their claims about Scripture and the history of the church and the rest of it. And he's definitely worth a follow on whatever social media platform that you tend to spend your time on. He's even on YouTube. I've learned more about Catholic apologetics following him on X than probably from anyone else recently. And he posted this. He said, President Biden became a stonecutter the day before he left office. That'd be January 19th. This is a blatant violation of the Catholic faith. Supporting the Moloch sacrifice wasn't enough for many bishops. Will open stonecutter membership be? On Sunday, January 19th, 2025, at a private event, I'm going to be mocking this organization throughout this with some of my cutesy nicknames, because you can't actually use what they're called on these platforms. They tend to get touchy about that. So, Master Top Taco membership with full honors were conferred upon President Joseph R. Biden in recognition to his outstanding service to the United States of America. And he gives you, Mr. Charles gives you a link to the actual original place where this was posted, which was, as you will find out, from the organization themselves. So this is not exactly this is just some internet rumor. Now, the link he provides takes us to the website of the Conference of Grand Masters of Prince Hall, which is an African-American stonecutter organization. See, they made Joe Biden not an honorary member of their organization, but a full member, an actual member, not an honorary one. I mean, I'm going to show you them just from their page, them bragging about this, because again, this is not just an internet rumor. So here we go to their page. And the first thing you'll notice is, yeah, those are stonecutters. Without question. Full regalia, all the whole 9 yards. And then there's pictures of them converting, and we can use the word converting, the very super duper Catholic former president when he was in his last full day of office to their little diabolical club. I'm not going to read their full statement because it gets really tedious, but here's what they say. Resolution of membership, President Joseph R. Biden Jr. It is with great pleasure that I, Victor C. Major, 27th, the most worshipful Top Taco, welcome our newest member to the Prince Hall family. On Sunday, January 19th, 2025, did this on a Sunday, at a private event, the Master Top Taco membership with full members were conferred upon President Joseph R. Biden Jr. in recognition of his outstanding service to the United States of America. And what follows is a resolution of membership that describes what their organization, which they fully admit is a stonecutter organization, to be part of a brotherhood dedicated to personal growth, service to others, and the pursuit of knowledge and truth. It's an honor to belong to an organization that promotes these timeless values. And then they go and give you all the whole long thing here, how his service reflects the core values of their little temple. And yeah, this has begged a few questions from people. You know, they didn't just do this. This had to have been in the works for a very long time. For a very, very long time. And so, again, a debate raging online now. And the debate goes around this. Did President Biden excommunicate himself over this? A lot of people say yes. I saw Michael Knowles say he automatically excommunicated himself. And the problem is, the answer appears to actually be no. And not because of his well-documented cognitive issues. A lot of people are actually now thinking that maybe those issues were, yes, bad enough that he shouldn't have had the job he had, but clearly there were other signs that he was able to making some rather strategic decisions. All you have to do is see his behavior during the waning days of that election cycle. But people are now being forced to come face to face with one of the hard truths about the post-Vatican II era in the church. In 1917, the first formal code of canon law was established, and in that code of canon law, membership in organizations like the one we're talking about, or similar organizations that waged war against the church and against Christendom more broadly, incurred automatic excommunication. Catholics were formally forbidden from being part of them. But in 1983, after Vatican II, John Paul II promulgated a new code of canon law, and suddenly the penalty of excommunication is removed. Matt Gaspers posted on X the two relevant sections of the Code of Canon Law side by side, and I'm going to show this to you so you can see how this changed. So, starting with the 1917 Code of Canon Law, it says those giving their names to such organizations or other associations of this sort that machinate, great word, against the church or legitimate civil powers, another good inclusion there, contract by that fact excommunication simply reserved the apostolic see. Code of Canon Law, 1917. And what that means is, what reserved the apostolic see means he has to go to whoever does this and repents has to go to the Vatican and get the Pope or somebody who's a delegate of the Pope to absolve them of this sin. And he goes on to say, sadly, the penalty of automatic excommunication is not included in the current 1983 Code of Canon Law. Quote, a person who joins an association which plots against the church is to be punished with a just penalty. However, a person who promotes or directs an association of this kind is to be punished with an interdict. Punished with a just penalty or punished with an interdict. An interdict means you can't receive communion, but you're still Catholic. Now, notice also that this also would include joining things like, Soviet parties and that kind of thing, right? All the old groups that Joe McCarthy went after, any Catholic part of those organizations would also be automatically excommunicated. Bear that one in mind. And he goes on to say in November 1983, the CDF, that would be 1983 under Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, reaffirmed the church's negative judgment in regard to such associations and stated, the faithful who enroll in such associations are in a state of grave sin and may not receive Holy Communion. Oh, it makes you wonder why they pulled that out of the Code of Canon Law, doesn't it? That's a little weird, right? This is one of those kind of red-pilling moments for a lot of people because you put the two side by side, and the 1917 Code of Canon Law was much clearer on what happens, because being excommunicated is a lot worse than an interdict, because an interdict sounds like you can have it lifted by your bishop. Well, now, just a bit of a caveat here. I don't spend any time really worrying about secular stonecutter groups because we've been living in the world they've created for at least a century now, if not longer. They've done such a good job of secularizing the culture that reportedly they have actually hard time recruiting people to join them. It's not as easy as it used to be for them to find members. They won, basically, in the secular realm, at least for the time being. I do worry much more about the church versions of the stonecutters. St. Gallen Group, the Lavender Clubs, and related movements in the church that are clearly organized and attempting to destroy the faith and replace it with something else. We call that something else these days the synodal church or synodality, but it's really the ape of the church of prophecy. And I tend to worry much more about that than secular nonsense. There's a pervasive belief in the secular world that virtually every American president has been a member of that organization. The current one is not, and you can tell because of how they treated him in New York City. The social, and I mean like going back to the 70s and 80s, how they treated him. The social elite mocked him, did not like him for a lot of reasons. If he had been a member of that organization, that would have been different. And clearly, President Biden was not a member of that organization either. But it does beg the question, if he was admitted the day before he left office, how long was he flirting with this? How long was he talking to them privately about this? The other question about this, one that's very key to all of this, is this why he canceled his meeting with Pope Francis? You remember it was reported that he was going to go speak with Francis in the days right before that he was going to travel to the Vatican to meet with Francis. And then all the things going on in Southern California happened, and that's when he sort of ducked out of that. Okay, the time to meet with these guys, right at the height of all that happening. And I do wonder if that's why he ducked out of this. But the other more basic question on this is, everyone's asking, did he excommunicate himself? And the answer to that does not appear to be yes. Let's turn to an article from Pillar Catholic for this. And I'm going to show you why for those of you who may not be aware of this, this canon law question here is a perfect illustration of why the SSPX exists. It really is. Because, I don't know if you know this, but the SSPX, they acknowledge the existence of the current code of canon law, and they cite it when necessary. But if you actually read a lot of their documents, they cite the 1917 Code of Canon Law. And they do that because, quite frankly, the current Code of Canon Law has some problems with it, as this topic is illustrating. So the Pillar published this yesterday. Headline, did Joe Biden join the stonecutters? And again, for those who don't believe, there's their photograph right from their website. I showed that one to you just a moment ago. And here it is again, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Here's the article. It's not very long. An announcement surfaced online Friday, issued the conference of the top tucko of Prince Hall House Stonecuttery, stating that the Grand House of South Carolina had conferred membership on President Joe Biden. According to the announcement dated January 19th, the day before Joe Biden left office, the president was granted a resolution of membership by the House in recognition of his exceptional dedication and service to the United States. Sorry, I can't say that without laughing. We all just lived through his exceptional service to the United States, which reflects the core values of the most worshipful Prince Hall Big House of free and accepted stonecutters in the state of South Carolina, including brotherly love, relief, and truth. Relief. I wonder how they're using that word. I bet you the people in North Carolina might disagree. It is not uncommon for outgoing presidents to be honored by groups and organizations, but as the second Catholic to hold the office, Biden's new membership of the House presents a particular issue. Catholics have been banned from joining such houses and organizations since 1738 and are subject to canonical penalties for doing so. So is Joe Biden now a member of that organization? And if so, what canonical penalties does he face? Based on the facts available, the situation is more complicated than you might think. And then it goes into some history, here. Before long, remember, they were founded in 1717, but you have to understand something. That's when they formed all their big houses, right? In like London and Paris and some other places. But to get to that point, they had to be around for a lot longer than that. And if you go take a deep dive into their history, it turned out that they took their name, that M word name, they took that because they essentially took over organizations of skilled laborers who would go around building cathedrals and things, who all had, handshakes and little signs they'd give each other and all the other things to be able to identify with one another. They had basically free travel because of their skilled nature of their work. And then moneyed interests basically liked it and got involved in all of this. And that's when these organizations kind of got changed. And then they really got changed as time went on. But their history goes back well before 1717. It's just that this was their big formalization. But it was not long after that the Pope chimed in and said, before long, Pope Clement XII banned Catholics from joining because, while that organization was religiously tolerant, allowing people of any denomination to join, the Pope found that it actually promoted religious indifferentism. The belief that it doesn't matter what religious creed a person believes because everyone in the house understood themselves to be serving a higher notion of natural virtue. That has consequences. As the organization spread across Europe, the papal condemnations kept coming, and 8 popes issued encyclicals or papal bulls imposing a penalty of automatic excommunication on any Catholic who joined them, until the promulgation of the first Code of Canon Law in 1917, which also included the ban on membership and the penalty. During those centuries, a lot changed between the church and that organization, though a lot of what the church said about why Catholics couldn't join stayed the same. This is that's a nice vague way of saying things like the permanent destruction of the Alta Vendita was found, where you find these organizations were admitting that they weren't just pushing indifferentism, but they really wanted to subvert Christendom and to subvert the church. And they had a special way they planned to do it, and the whole 9 yards. I have that document on this channel if you ever want to listen to a quick reading of it. It was published in English by Popes Leo XIII and St. Pius X out of their own personal family wealth. They paid for it to be translated into like 5 languages and given to the bishops of the Western world. That's how big of a deal they thought it was. Okay. He says, but the church has always condemned the idea of that group because the church said it removed Catholics from legitimate ecclesiastical oversight while they were being effectively catechized into a new philosophy, a different way of looking at the world. Some Catholics, though, thought the church had changed its mind about that organization after Vatican II because when the new Code of Canon Law was promulgated in 1983, the explicit mention of that organization was removed from the Penal Code. Instead, the new law banned Catholics who joined societies which, quote, plot against the church and said they should be punished with a just penalty. But before the new law came into force, the then prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, issued a public clarification stating that the Church's negative judgment in regard to such associations remains unchanged, because the principles of that organization have always been considered irreconcilable with the doctrine of the Church, and therefore membership in them remains forbidden. He also clarified that explicit mention of that organization had been removed because the new wording was meant to capture broader categories of societies and not be limited to those kinds of houses. And so this is one of the reasons you see a lot of ambiguity, because if you get specific, they don't believe you can capture similar organizations that are not explicitly mentioned, right? And this is one of those consequences of the ambiguity. They give you an ambiguous definition, and what happens? All of a sudden, people start asking and joining these organizations. And then to put the icing on the cake, this is what Ratzinger said. The faithful who enroll in those kind of associations are in a state of grave sin and may not receive Holy Communion, he clarified, which is a bit different than being automatically excommunicated. He goes a little more over history. And then, this is, this organization that we're talking about here, specific one with Joe Biden, is an African-American organization. But as far as the church is concerned, that group has all the same problems from a philosophical, theological, and canonical perspective as any other branch of their parent organization. The ban on Catholics joining that organization is centuries old and is recognized by the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith as both a crime and a grave sin. But there are some things we don't know about his situation, even after that, what the South Carolina House has said, that on January 19th, at a private event, that their head gave him membership with full honors were conferred upon him, who now has the rank of Master Top Taco. The House announces the membership was conferred on Biden by the House, not that he went through any actual liturgies. It might seem like a question of formalities, but could actually make a big canonical difference. For a start, it's not clear to what extent he accepted, formally or informally, membership of the House, or was merely presented to him as something they did for and to him. Pictures of the event show the president shaking hands and embracing the head of the House, but not receiving any certificate or physical representation of membership. That matters because the actual crime in canon law is not the status of being a member, but the act of joining. And herein lies the problem with the entire post-conciliar order. That matters because the actual crime in canon law is not the status of being a member, but the act of joining. I'm sorry. You don't become a member if you don't join. Okay? The actual crime in canon law is not the status of cheating on your spouse, but the act of adultery. Oh, I'm sorry. Apples and apples. It's the same thing, guys. Simply put, if Biden didn't actively do anything to join the group or accept his membership, it's reasonable to conclude that he did not violate the relative canon, which according to canonical principles must be interpreted strictly. So they didn't help. Pillar didn't help much at all with that, right? This feels, it has the whiff of Pope-splaining about it. Francis didn't utter heresy because if you squint really hard, read it from an angle, and go look at some things that he did that were orthodox, and it's not really heresy. It's just ambiguous and bad. Did he excommunicate himself by the Code of Canon Law today? No, he did not. It's still forbidden. He cannot receive communion. And this puts the bishops in a kind of a dicey position, because you think that they're going to call him out for this. They wouldn't call him out for 50 years of opposing the church's teaching on moral matters. And call out Lady Moloch, Nancy Pelosi, and the one who did, they nearly canceled. And this story is especially relevant because this was announced while the U.S. bishops have been, for the last couple of days, releasing pointless statement after pointless statement going after the new president for his policy of aggressively removing what we call unwelcome visitors to our common home and sending them back to their homes. The bishops are quite upset about this. They really are. They're so very angry, and they say a lot of Catholic-sounding things, but when you actually have studied what the church has always said about this issue, and if you apply the hermeneutic of continuity that they insist that we give them, then what you find is that they are not giving you the church's position on this. They're not. They're giving you the Bergoglian position on that topic that has got them worked up to such a lather. And so I'm going to issue a correction here. A couple days ago, when I reported on this, I showed you that they got directly $129 million. And then when you factored in the other way, directly from the government, right? But if you factor in the ways of, where they accept subcontracting work from private corporations and from nonprofit organizations that are secular, you can get that to about $500 million that they've gotten every year from working on this issue for the government, right? And doing it in a way that essentially undermines the social order. Well, I was wrong about that. That turns out that it wasn't $500 million. It was more like $725 million every year. So we've got a complicit clergy with this headline, bought and paid for, 2.9 billion reasons bishops loved Biden but hate Trump. Yeah, I lowballed that number for you folks. I'm sorry. My bad. We were working with the data we had at the time. Published yesterday from complicit clergy. For the past 4 years, many Catholics have been perplexed as to why most Catholic bishops has refused to condemn Joe Biden's heinous anti-Catholic policies. Initially, these bishops have openly welcomed Biden to receive Holy Communion, in spite of Canon 915 stating Catholics who obstinately persist in manifest grave sin are not be permitted to Holy Communion. It'll be a little surprise if Biden goes down in history as America's most radical anti-Catholic president. And add on top of that everything we've just been talking about. For those who continue to be astonished by our shepherd's silence, we may have discovered the answer. Complicit clergy just completed updating its previous analysis on the unwelcome visitor-related funding awarded to Catholic non-governmental organizations to include all 4 years of his administration. The project involved extracting federal movement-related transactions from usaspending.gov for the 16-year period between 2009 to 2024. We reviewed all the organizations receiving that subjects-related federal assistance, flagging those NGOs affiliated with the Catholic Church. We then determined in which Catholic diocese each of these organizations reside. Finally, we loaded this data into a Tableau, a software system that helps people explore data insights through intuitive visualizations. People say that the picture is worth 1,000 words, but in this case, it's worth billions. The Biden administration granted Catholic NGOs nearly $2.9 billion in that subjects-related funding over the past 4 years. That's more than triple the level of funding under Trump's first administration and nearly double the amount awarded under the Obama administration over the course of 8 years. And here's a table for you. Do you see why they're upset? I don't trust them on this issue. Not when there's that kind of money on the table. Remember, folks, the church is broke. Church is broke, and it's broke because some bishops back in like the 30s and 40s thought it would be good to just quietly let James Martin types into the priesthood. And it turned out that the James Martin types have a problem. And that problem is among their ranks are a whole lot of McCarrick types. And the logical problem flowed from that, as we all learned in 2003 and 2004. So they're very upset about that. They're broke because, well, lawsuits followed, and this is what they're doing. They're engaging in one of the most cynical misuses of the gospel imaginable, to the tune of $2.9 billion from 2021 onwards. And really, if you look at 2021, that number was low, right? It was in 2022, 619 million. Then 2023, 1.1 billion. In 2024, 947 million. Most of that 2.9 billion came in 2022 to 2024. That's why they're upset. And it gets even worse. Since 2009, Catholic NGOs have pocketed $5.2 billion of our hard-earned tax dollars over a 16-year period by providing movement-related services to the federal government. What is truly astounding is that over half this amount was awarded in just the past 4 years. Please keep in mind that this $5.2 billion figure is likely largely understated due to facts. One, our analysis only includes programs that are clearly associated with the subject. NGOs are likely using funds from that, not that subject related programs to serve the folks in question. Meaning they're taking money that's not set aside for that to use it for that subject. Our analysis does not include non-Catholic organizations. We saw evidence of state agencies sharing their funding with Catholic NGOs without specifically making a sub-award to these organizations, which, by the way, might be illegal. That might be fraud, because they're misusing taxpayer dollars for grant programs. That's pretty highly regulated for a lot of good reasons, tax reasons and all sorts of other things. While we did our best to include all Catholic NGOs in our analysis, we undoubtedly missed some Catholic organizations which lack Catholic identifying characteristics in their names. Perhaps it's just a coincidence, but we learned just last week that the U.S. Catholic Church has paid out over $5 billion to settle the financial cost of the McCarrick problem, not including the millions of dollars they have spent in legal fees trying to defend themselves. This amounts to over $10 billion that our bishops have extracted from our pockets, and this before they appeal for more in Sunday collections. It should come as no surprise that Catholic Charities has been the top recipient of federal funding, with their network of NGOs harvesting more than $2.6 billion of federal funding for this subject's related services. We should also not be surprised to learn that the illustrious United States Conference of Catholic Bishops came in second place, reaping nearly $1.6 billion. And then the dioceses that are recipient dioceses. Oh, by the way, Fort Worth. Remember the story about the nuns that I keep covering when there's an update? Well, that bishop over that time and his predecessors raked in $952 million, the second highest, right? Only after, since 2009, Washington, D.C. We're not going to count McElroy there because he just got there, but that would be Wilton Gregory, Donald Wuerl, and Ted McCarrick. Do you see how this works? We go all the way down, and I'm actually kind of relieved to see that my diocese doesn't rank really near the top unless I missed it, right? I mean, Chicago was 116 million in that time period. So it could be worse for a lot of us. Portland ranks higher than my diocese, actually, but I don't live in the most populated archdiocese. This is why the bishops are reacting the way they have. It's because of money, a lot more money than we thought just a couple of days ago. Good work by complicit clergy for this. And yes, in just a few minutes after this live stream is over, I will have this data at returntotradition.org in the link section and the sources there for today's videos. Please go check it out for yourself. Never take my word for it. You can go read this for yourself, okay? But that's why they're upset. This is why they haven't said much about the new president suddenly releasing a lot of people who were praying outside of the temples of Moloch and then who went to jail for it. Yeah, that happened yesterday or the day before. He did that. This is one bishop did, to his credit, but most of them have remained silent. This is why they're not going to say anything about Sleepy Joe joining a condemned organization that earned him automatic excommunication before 1983, but now suddenly doesn't. They're not going to say much. And I'll bet you when he goes to Mass this Sunday, if he bothers, he'll go and receive Holy Communion just fine. Because $500 million since 2009, half of that since 2022. It's the money, folks. And it's the money because they let the James Martin types into the priesthood and wreaked havoc, causing countless souls to leave the church and doing unspeakable harm to the minds and bodies of the most vulnerable. This is all connected. All of it. All right, folks, let's take a look here. Oh, somebody complaining that I'm live streaming at this time. Laura asked, do I sleep? Yes, I just keep odd hours. All right, folks. If there's any final thoughts here in the live chat, get them in. Please pray for Joe Biden to have his conscience illuminated. This is about the salvation of souls. The first law of the church is the salvation of souls. Everything you do should drive you to pray for the people we talk about in podcasts like this, news articles like the ones we go over here. The entire purpose of that is to pray for those who are doing this villainy. That's what you should be doing. It is your opportunity to do one of the most important works of spiritual mercy you can ever do, which is to pray for the conversion of a sinner. Remember, today's the feast of St. Paul's, the conversion of St. Paul on the old calendar. Your prayers could help somebody have the road to Damascus, or as we call it these days, a come to Jesus moment, where you through your prayers help give them the grace they need to reconcile with God, that you become an instrument of grace for God to use. Please take this seriously. Salvation of souls is the highest law of the church. So any final thoughts on any of this in the comments? Get them in. It's always a fun day when I, on a Saturday when I'm not just reading to you a letter, because that's what I usually do on a Saturday. But when this story came across the desk, I could not ignore it. This is not the kind of thing you can easily ignore. Catherine Cavity says maybe his parish priest will refuse communion until he repents. We'll see. But remember, he's got decades upon decades of publicly just ignoring the church's teaching on morality and saying he doesn't agree. Well, I'm personally in communion with the church on this, but in practice, I oppose. So you got enough of that stuff. And they ignored that, right, for politics. All right, it's 5:30 here. He says, all time zones present. Yeah, it's 5:30 where I am too. So good morning, I guess, neighbor, somewhere in the American heartland. But again, pray for him. This is serious stuff. And this is why your bishops speak as outspoken as they are against the high-profile Trump policy that's being enacted right now. That's why. It's the money they need to get out of the hole they created for themselves through their negligence. That's why. Not counting the money that they've lost from not getting as much tithing as they used to, because a lot of Catholics don't tithe anymore. Or they find other ways to do it. But they don't give to bishops because they don't trust them. The problem you have with that is the church does need material resources to operate. They need some money to operate. You can't have, mass in a building if you can't maintain the building. You need electricity, and you need running water, and you need to repair the building, and that takes money. Your priest is going to need something to live off of, right? And it takes money. And on and on and on it goes. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church and for former President Biden, Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.